So we have no idea who's supposed to start us off. So I'm just jumping in. But it's like I'm going to jump in before either of you can say anything. But
it doesn't matter, right? We'll just have a silly conversation about whatever comes to mind.
So it's amazing that we have hit 100 episodes. It's hard to believe that we have gotten 100.
Yeah, although so we're counting those first two, 5-minute cartoon episodes, by the way, before Elena joined us. So it's legit 100. I just want to point out that we had 2 weird episodes.
Well, those are practice. It's all good.
Well, and we learned something from them, which is the whole point, right? Which was don't try to do a very scripted, with different backgrounds for every scene and whatever. Like that's not worth it. So
yeah. The work to put together the episode taking longer than making the episode is not good. That's I think we were at I think when Jeff and I did those 2 episodes, Elena, you weren't involved yet in that particular case, but I think we took about 6 or 7 hours or something to put it all together before we. So anyway,
I'm happy.
Yeah. So I have a question actually for both of you that I have told the origin story of Twinning Strategy like a million times. And I always tell it that, I was just in the process of leaving my last corporate job at Cracker Barrel, and I was reaching out to people, and Elena was probably one of the very first. Actually, Elena, I don't know if you know this. You might know this. Like, you were the very first person that I ever connected with on LinkedIn. So I was probably the first person you're probably the first person that I called when I was leaving my job or whatever. And we had a call, and I mentioned that Eric was in biotech, and you're like, I want to meet Eric and whatever. And then the 2 of you had a call. And then here's the part that I get fuzzy on. So what was it that led from that call between the 2 of you to because I always say, I don't know what happened, but somehow that turned into, we had a Friday afternoon call about marketing and sales every Friday. And then at some point, Eric said, if we recorded these, we could have a podcast. That's how I tell the story, but I don't understand what was it? What was the thing that happened between your first conversation with each other and the conversations we started to have on Friday that you were like, oh, let's have a call on Friday? Or do you not know?
I don't know, Eric. Why did we decide to loop him back in?
My tongue, I know, right? Why? I think we actually, maybe you and I decided, this is tongue in cheek, obviously. Maybe you and I decided that Jeff needed an intervention.
Yes, either that, or we geeked out too deeply in the data in biotech and said, that's getting too thick.
I think we just had a good conversation, and then I was like, oh, maybe we should just have, let's the 3 of us just get together and chat or whatever. And then
we did.
We're just whatever. And I think it just so happened that those 2 episodes I was talking about before, where we were doing like so much work to put them together, we had just gotten through that. And I was just like, why are we doing all this work? Why don't we just go live? And so I think I was putting pressure on the 2 of you for a couple of weeks. Like, can we just do it live? Like, it didn't happen right away. I think I had to push.
You did, and you were. And I also remember my reaction to it, meaning, oh, well, then we need a plan and the timetable and, a list. And we have to figure out that, no, let's just turn on the light button.
Well, it's so interesting because I don't do this as much as I used to, but I was recording yesterday a podcast, somebody else's podcast where I was the guest. And I asked her at the end of the episode, at the end of recording the episode, so when will this be live? And she said, oh, I'm so behind. It'll probably be June. And I'm like, oh my God. And I said, that's why we do it. That's why we always have done our podcast live, because it's like you end up, and it's hard to say whether there's been like a downside to that in the sense of like, maybe that stopped us from growing our bigger audience or who knows, whatever it is. But it's like, I think, Eric, you said a long time ago, you were like, if we have to edit these, we'll stop around episode 6. And I think that was,
oh my God.
Right.
I don't even
So,
want to think about it. I'm stopping the episodes that we're editing before we even do them. Like, forget.
so I don't know.
But
I mean,
it's like it's clear, right, that is a problem because I think Dustin Poole mentioned when I don't know if it was on live or whatever, but he mentioned like, oh, I'm
it's not.
getting behind, and he is like was his first couple of months, I think he was prolific. He would just go out and do these interviews on the street. He does a fantastic job. They were really well edited. I was feeling very like, oh shit, maybe we should be doing something more, hardcore about this. And then we had him on the episode a couple months ago, and he's like, yeah, I am so behind. Like, no kidding. Now there's a way to do it. It's you have a ton of money and then you hire an intern or lower level person to do all the editing for you, and then you can do whatever you want. But we're not Joe
And
Rogan.
also, like, how do you see yourself, right? Do you see yourself as a media channel, or do you see yourself as a platform for a good conversation?
Yeah, and I think that's part of why this works for 100 episodes, which is we didn't start off with a goal of we have to get this many people, we have to use it for some purpose, we got to get we just started it because we were having fun, and for the most part, I think that yeah. And we met we've met lots of interesting people, and I think we've learned a lot about what works and doesn't work. But I also think we did get kind of stuck in a groove, and I'm really glad we're doing this episode right now because we got a little stuck in that groove of like interview style. And my favorite episodes have been the ones where we're having a fun, conversation with somebody. In other words, like infotainment style, like we're having a fun conversation, but hopefully we're saying something that's useful, at least to ourselves.
Yeah, and remember, I used to say, this is our digital kitchen, and you are a guest, and the best conversations always happen in the kitchen, and you sure don't interview people in your kitchen, right? You eat and drink and just kind of half-jokingly discuss all the world's problems.
And I think I would say, I'm going to pick up on that point, is I think maybe that's been maybe the hardest thing to do, is to how do you, it's not just it's the guest and us as the host, is how do you maintain that kitchen table conversation? It's so easy when you have a guest and they have such interesting things to say and whatever, so easy to slip into that interview mode and ask questions and whatever. And so that's the thing that I think has been an interesting challenge that I'm not sure I would have expected, when we first started. Is it's hard, I mean, I find when I'm on other people's podcasts that I tend to act like I'm being interviewed, and then I answer questions. It's hard to, like, every once in a while we have some guests that have been able to sort of jump in and be like, oh, I'm going to ask questions back, and I find it hard to do as a guest. It's hard when you're the guest to play that role as well.
Well, I think part of it is also it's a sort of expectation. If it's a podcast, that means that we're going to have a turn and you ask, I answer kind of thing. But not every podcast has to be that way. And I think that's probably a little bit of a outside of the box, so to speak.
Yeah, so I've always been the one to be like, have you listened to this podcast or that podcast? Like, they're having fun. And I always bring up the Spanish one that I've listened to several times, and I think Jeff, you've listened to several times as well, called La Cena de los Idiotes, where it's basically just a bunch of goofy people talking about goofy scenarios or like whatever, and then they just kind of bring different scenarios in or whatever, or the Kelsey brothers, where they're just like, they have this great relationship with each other, and then they're just kind of tongue in cheek. Of course, they're talking about football or whatever, but it's like there's something about that feeling. And I wonder, on the one hand, how do we capture more fun and kind of the goofiness and move away from that interviews? The other is like, I think we never we still haven't figured out exactly what our niche is. And also, I guess the question to you guys is, our niche not conducive to fun, goofy conversations? I mean, maybe that's the problem.
But I mean, I think it can be, right? I mean, I think there are funny, you know, podcasts that are, that have a niche, right? And it's generally we talk about relationships, or generally we talk about business or whatever. It's hard to, I think it's probably a little bit hard to create a real niche about. Actually, I know a woman who has a podcast that's all about. It's called the Big 4-0, I think is what it's called, and it's basically about. She's just been interviewing for many years anybody who's just recently turned 40 or whatever, and just what are the ways that life has changed when you turn 40, right? And so it was like it's like you're shooting the shit, but you've got a little bit of but there's a little bit of a guardrail, right? That's hey, we're going to talk about this. But I almost wonder it has to be more of a question rather than a topic, right? It's hard to talk about whatever finance or something, and like whatever, like, but like if you had one that was like a podcast of like, why are finance people so annoying, like then you could have it. That was
well, it also, I think, depends on how the above mentioned finance person wants to see the world and how they want to see themselves, right? And we give people a permission to be goofy and to be lighthearted and to deliver their message in the format that's a little bit outside of like suit and tie. But in some cases, people sort of feel comfortable in a suit and tie, and no matter how hard we drag them out, they kind of drag themselves and us back in there.
Well, I think people are worried about being in the public eye, even though probably being on our podcast doesn't entirely qualify as being massively in the public eye. But still, you're putting it out there. It's something that people might be able to find at some point, and people are trying to feel like they want to feel like whatever they're presenting is that professional persona or whatever. And I think that leads to this question that all three of us have discussed multiple times, is like, what is our guest strategy? Because our guest strategy has been in people with interesting backgrounds in business and not people who are going to be good guests. And I don't think we can go 100% to just people who are good guests, because, I don't know, that probably leads to having zero topicality in with respect to our podcast goals. But I do think that, how do we get, I mean, I still want to have people come on and occasionally and talk about, about synthetic milk, which is one of my favorite, like, sort of out there weird episodes. But what was the guest name? Was it
Opalia is the company.
Yeah. Anyway, super interesting, but like also, especially we have had a lot of first-time podcast guests. Mm-hmm. And we pride ourselves, I think, all three of us, on being a good first podcast. We've said that numerous times of like, we're not going to make you suffer for half an hour or whatever. But I also think there's room to think about, okay, how do we make sure that we're having that, that more banter, like, and I don't know, you guys both challenge me. Maybe my whole notion that this should be more of a banter like thing is wrong. I think it's kind of similar to you, Elena, your point about the kitchen table. But how do we, is it wrong? Was that the wrong approach in the first 100 episodes?
It's a good approach for us, and it's a good approach for listeners, because to be honest, like, if you think about your own experience, at some point you just want to hear something a bit more real. And the business conversation presented in a more real format, as if what's under the hood, what's really happening, and how does it really play out, rather than, oh, well, let's polish everything, let's present everything as if we're, going to the board meeting here, right? But again, there could be some people who wake up as if they're going to the board meeting, so.
Well, and I think the other thing though is that I think that, Eric, you mentioned before this point about people don't feel comfortable, sort of in the public eye or whatever. And I'll go back to like we're at 100 episodes this week of the podcast, but interestingly, I just hit my 100th article that I wrote. So I must have started writing articles around the same time that we started. And I remember the very first article I wrote, like I proofread it a million times and I asked, probably had Eric read it and, whatever. And I just, now I'm just like, I'll dash off an article and like, I've actually taken to like running it through ChatGPT and say, are there any typos? Because there were so many typos in my articles because I just was like, whatever, I'm just going to post this out there. And and it's and there's something to be said for you just have to keep showing up and showing up and showing up. And I said this, I was doing one of my job seeker groups last week and I was talking about interview skills and networking skills and whatever. I said to some extent you just have to embrace the suck. You just have to be terrible at it until you're not terrible at it anymore. And I think that especially people who have been in the corporate world for a long time and haven't gotten out of it for a long enough time, there's very much this attitude of you can't make a mistake. If you make a mistake, you're like your career is over or whatever. And the entrepreneurial world is very opposite of that, right? Make mistakes as fast as possible, screw stuff up and then move on and whatever. I mean, I think that all the time. Like sometimes I'll have a bad sales conversation with somebody or whatever it is. And I'm just like, whatever, move on. There's 8 billion people on the planet. I'll just talk to someone else. But I think that is an unusual, sort of mindset if you are in the corporate world, right? I can't make mistakes. In fact, there's so much so that I think that, I never posted anything on LinkedIn at all because I'm like, well, what if I post something and, my company is unhappy with it and whatever. And so getting past that sense of like, oh my God, if I do something wrong, the whole world is going to see it. But again, it's funny. Like I remember I was helping somebody with writing their first article recently and they were like, do you think this is good enough? I'm like, oh my God, just click post. Like, and move on to the next article. It's taken me like 100 articles to get to the point where I like regularly get a decent engagement with each article.
Yeah, and I would actually kind of push that a little forward and say even being on a podcast live, right? That's stepping into an unknown. And if the guest does something, or if your internet conks out, or it starts, blooping or squeaking or whatnot, even that, right? I have become a lot more comfortable with just living through it, whatever it is, rather than just like you said, being ready to script and control every second because it's uncontrollable.
So I
think the feeling like everybody, I think that we have this feeling when we're in like junior high school forward, right? That everybody's paying attention to us and waiting for us to screw up to mock us or whatever. And maybe at sometimes in our lives that's true, but actually nobody really cares what you're doing on the internet. The only reason that somebody's going to care what you're doing on the internet is because you're doing it so well that people are starting to pay attention. And yes, there are probably people out there who are just going to be an asshole to you because that's their personality, and you spent your whole life, or your whole relationship with them, that are kind of just digging at you or whatever. But even they will get bored after a while. Like, there's nobody who's like, what the hell are you doing on a podcast about business? There's nobody who cares after the 100th episode. I promise. There's nobody who thought it was weird that I started this podcast with you guys, who it's even on their radar that I'm still on a podcast or care. So, I think there's this belief that we are the center, it's this main character syndrome.
Right.
From the negative perspective, well, I guess it's always negative, but it's not like I need to be, it's that I need to be the main character, but this feeling like I'm always the main character and everybody's going to come after me. And it's just not true. Nobody's paying attention who doesn't think what you're doing is interesting or good after the 100th episode. Promise.
Well, and I think I'm going to pick up on something that Mike Sennacherib shared with us last week, on the show, which was he was talking about like their ginger cookies. And he said, like, you can make a ginger cookie that everybody will like, but all the people that don't really like ginger cookies will not buy them because they don't like ginger cookies.
Right.
Even they might like this one, but they don't like ginger cookies. And so the point is you need to make the best ginger cookie for people who like ginger cookies. And I think that's, that's sort of the niche thing and then whatever. And I think, actually, I think that, there's this idea in marketing, right, that you need to define who you're for and who you're against, right? Like, you want to create a tribe, if you will, of people who are, kind of aligned in like, this is, people who are in this group like this and people who are not in this group like that, which, may not be great for the world and whatever, but it is great if you want to build an audience. Is just recognize you can't create something for everyone. So, well, at this moment, I think
let's do our chat GPT, whatever LLM question.
All right. So I'm going to give you, there's a couple of really good, I asked it for funny and thought-provoking, but it kind of went thought-provoking. So I have a question for you both that I thought was really interesting. And I actually have an answer for it myself, but I won't share it yet. Is which episode felt the riskiest to record at the time and why did we do it anyway? I don't know if
why we did it. That's easy because it was live.
It was live, right?
We took care of that answer.
but so what do you think was I guess I would tweak the question a little bit just because our podcast goes live. It's a little bit of a weird question, but if we tweak the question to what was the episode that in your mind was the riskiest conversation? I mean, I can certainly remember the episodes where we got the most like flack, but what was the riskiest?
Yeah. It was the milk one, right?
Yeah, we definitely got some negative reaction to the milk one. Actually, there was another one we got some negative reaction, but Elena, I don't know. What's your answer?
I must have good risk tolerance because I think they all were, okay. The mention of mushrooms one time got me a little startled. I wasn't prepared for that. But aside from that,
okay,
even
right.
that was pretty clean, illegal.
I keep kind of gravitating, Jeff, towards Sandy only because we had so many, not because it was risky, but because we had so many technology problems. Like she fell off of it, but she had already, like when we started, it was a problem because she ended up on her phone and whatever, but that not risky, I think, in the sense that you're thinking. What is your
I have actually two that neither of you brought up. One was not so much that it was risky, but sort of in terms of getting controversial reactions was the father and son, David and what was the Roberts. When they were talking about AI and artificial emotional intelligence, which got a little bit of controversial. But interestingly, the one that I was thinking was Eddie Duyos, who's one of my favorite episodes of all time. But we went much deeper in that conversation into sort of inclusion and things
that was far beyond its style.
Yeah, and I loved that conversation. It's one of my favorite episodes, but it was definitely, us going beyond the, where we normally feel comfortable. So that was, do you want another one?
Sure, bring it on.
Why not? Let's do it.
I'm going to tweak this. The question asks, what's the most unexpected way this podcast has affected your actual business, not just your thinking? But I'll just say, what is the most unexpected way that this podcast has affected you and the way you go about your life and so forth? I'd just be interested to hear.
Well,
go ahead, Noah.
I guess I can go first, and then I always saw myself as an idea person. right? And when there is an idea, I'm all about the idea, and all else is kind of, it just falls to the side. And becoming a podcaster, I have become much more in tune with the person on the other side of the screen. And to some degree, I have become more hospitable, if that's the right word. I have become more engaging. I don't think just about the idea, but also like that other person, what's going on with them, how are they interacting, what is it actually, how are they saying. So I think I definitely evolved in my leadership skills where I did not expect any impact whatsoever.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great point. Eric,
I'm going to go a completely different direction because I think it's interesting because, so Elena, I actually like your direction better in terms of like thinking of it sort of psychologically or whatever, but technology wise, and the tools. So we talked in the beginning about how our whole point is to be as basically as lazy as possible about doing this. Like we want to do it, but we don't want it to like dominate our lives and whatever. And part of that was, and I think it was actually Heather, who, I'm forgetting her last name at the moment. I've known her for Margaret, or what's her name?
Margot?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was. Anyway, whatever. Heather, who was on, and I've known her for years, so I should remember her last name. She said, "Oh, you need to get on these other platforms and cross promote or whatever." And that was the thing. That was the moment I think when I was like, okay, if we're gonna do this, and it's taking me, well, actually, I think I went and did that one week, and I'm like, this took me forever to cut up the clips and whatever. I'm not going to do this for much longer. And then we started actually. I started actually coding up some code to make this actually, to make the clips more readily. And actually that's kind of was at least part of the basis of Jeff and me starting Twinning Edge. And we've been using those tools for a long time. So, and developing them a little more, although they've kind of, stagnated for several months in terms of, I shouldn't say stagnate. They work fantastically. We use them all the time, but we haven't built on them as much. But like, it was interesting that this problem that came out of the podcast essentially led us to a business, which I don't know, as Jeff and I determined the other day, like we helped drive over $1 million worth of business for our clients and ourselves last year. So it's not nothing.
I guess for me, I think the thing that has changed the most about me is that I was so I mean, there are lots of things that have happened over the last couple of years since I left my corporate role, but I would, if you had asked me 2 years ago if I was an introvert or an extrovert, I would have said I was an introvert, and now I'm not sure that's true anymore. In fact, I recently took like a fake version of the Myers-Briggs, and it said I was an extrovert, and I was like, I don't know whether that's supposed to change, but I still think I do have some introvert characteristics, but I am so much more willing to talk to people that I don't know, to reach out to people, to reconnect with people, to network, to to get on a podcast. I just show up on a podcast. I'm like, I don't know, whatever. And I don't worry about, like, I think in the early days when I had just started with my book, I would get a little nervous getting on a podcast. I'm like, well, what if I don't have an answer ready, whatever. It's like, I talk about this stuff all the time. Right. And I've been on, 100 of this podcast and 50 of another podcast and whatever. And so, it just, my whole view of things is just has shifted. And Eric, I guess you get a lot of credit for this, is that, like, you were the one that said, just do it, let's just do it. And I think that now I just do all kinds of stuff that I probably wouldn't be doing if you hadn't just given us that huge shove into, like, hey, do it.
Sometimes I'm like, recently I've actually been thinking like about this this very question. I'm like, would I even start? Like, would I like sometimes I'm wondering like what was I on?
I don't know what you were on, but not only did you bump Jeff, you only bumped me in the much more in the direction of doing something that I was always afraid, cautious, or thought, really, would somebody want to see or hear that? And I'm like, oh yeah. Now I'm like, yes, let's do it.
Well, and both of you ended up. I haven't been on another podcast, but both of you ended up doing like external podcasts as a result.
I'm actually on the third act. I hadn't really thought of it this way, but I do this thing with Sally Foley Lewis and this other woman, Lisa, who was on the show, and then Lisa Robin Wood, who wasn't on the show, but the three of us actually, so Lisa is in Cape Town, Sally lives in Australia, and we just come up with one question, every couple of weeks or whatever, there's a question and we each answer the question. Sally takes the three and puts them together and then we just post them. And
I didn't even know you were doing that.
Yeah, I post them on LinkedIn, probably once every other week or so. We've probably done 8 episodes of that. We don't do it live because I can tell you it is very, very hard to find time that works for Australia, Cape Town, and Boston. But
I honestly think you should find another 3 people to cover the other populated continents.
Yeah,
because you actually got 2 of the harder ones. You got Africa and Australia.
We've got English speaking folks, and Lisa actually sort of covers Europe because she's British.
She's both, right?
She's British, but she lives in Cape Town. But technically, she's geographically in South Africa. But it's funny. That idea came up, and I'm like, of course, and why not do this, right? And I can't even imagine that I would have done that, 2 years ago or whatever. So. And it's.
I definitely agree that this. I think we can at least call the first 100 episodes a successful experiment. There are ways that it would have been nice to see more success, like, our audience growing faster, more whatever, or in a different way or whatever. It would be nice to, to have figured out how to grow the podcast or whatever. But as far as like, what you're both saying, like this feeling of like, podcast isn't nerve-wracking, if anything, we probably need to like make it more that we're interacting with our guests. It's never like we've never had a moment. We've had moments where we're all talking over each other, but we've never had a moment where nobody can think of anything to keep it going.
It's been close. but yeah.
All right. No, but we could have probably kept it going, I think, and actually it's kind of funny, who is the person who we invented the ChatGPT questions for? Was that Marley? Was that
Marley? I think yes, early on.
That was a great little like discovery, because it's still fun. The fact that it's still fun to do that, like probably 85 to 92 episodes later, I forget when Marley was on our podcast, like we've been doing that, and then we've tried some other things and they've gone away, but that one I still think was a really clever, smart thing to do, and it's topical for many of our conversations. It's certainly topical at the moment to use AI for things. So I think that's cool that we came up with. I don't know how we came up with it, but it's cool that we came up with it.
So let's do I realize we're probably coming up on time here, but like quick 2 or 3 quick lightning round questions. So first one, favorite episode.
Well, mine was actually the father and son, because I love obscure topics. I am an idea person still.
I'm gonna say just from a vibe point of view rather than topic, because I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but like I think Ben Savage was such a fantastic episode because it was just the flow was great, the like back and forth was great. His energy is fantastic. I think we actually I can't remember whether we had impacted them starting their own podcast, so that's fantastic. What's yours, Jeff?
The one that popped into my head was Tony Scopolito, because I just think we just had such a fun conversation, and he started off in just a funny way, and it was just a good conversation. It was cool to reconnect with him, and it's been interesting how some of these conversations have led to reconnecting. I mean, I just talked to Tony again last week or whatever. I mean, it's like reconnecting with people and so forth, and just rekindling friendships and so forth, and so that's been really nice. All right, I'm not going to ask you your least favorite episode because I don't want to do that.
But we all probably agree.
Here's my question. I don't know if this is a lightning round question, but I guess my next question is just so what do you think? Where do you think we should go next?
Well, good question. I think I kind of like the podcasting format because I enjoy getting together with you, and I enjoy getting together with people who push our thinking. So I like that. In terms of, we were talking about picking guests and selecting them and screening them, easier said than done, right? Even when we screen them, we never know who is going to be an amazing guest and push it farther, and and who will not. So that's kind of hard to say, but I think maybe narrowing down more on the topics that are of interest, and even maybe being more topical with the guests. But that's probably my 2 cents.
So I'm gonna jump in, Eric, and I'll let you go last because you always get to go last. I think for me, I really like something that we talked about maybe a couple months ago now, which was this idea of what if we just pick the topic and then invite somebody who can talk about the topic, and then let's pick topics that are like going to that are going to create interesting conversations, right? Like rather than like how did you scale your business. And actually I learned this from the networking podcast, Wicked Connected as well, was after I learned so much, by the way, from being on a podcast about networking, from listening to everybody's advice about networking. But at some point it was like, okay, but we just keep having people coming on and say, you need to give more than you take and whatever. And it was like, it was great advice, but it was the same thing over and over again. I think having something that's like almost, I don't know, it has to be truly controversial, but like a semi-controversial, topic. And then basically saying, we're inviting you on, we are going to have a conversation about whether AI is going to take over the world this week. We want you to join our conversation. I think could be an interesting,
That's format. A great topic, by the way. That would be fun.
I will lose my sleep, so be careful.
No, but it's fun, right? Imagine having a conversation with, say, Ahmed Aladal about that topic, rather than like it being like this deep, interview about his digital twins or whatever. Like, what is the dark? Is digital twin technology dark, or it's for good or evil? And then you have a conversation about that. Like, I don't know, he just popped in my head, but like, I think there are, or even the other Eric Sigel, not that he would, I don't know that he would necessarily join us again, but like talking to people who are experts, but asking a little bit of a crazy question. But that's something, I mean, that's a question that's not so out there and unreasonable. People ask that question of these people all the time. Right. How do you have the conversation? So my thing is, look, I think we haven't done just the three of us episode since probably episode 5 or something like that. And I think this show, like, we have I just want to I want to mix up the format more. I think we should do more just the three of us. I think we should we had like that whole laundry list of cool ideas of like we throw a crazy question, or we can do the, what we were talking about right before we went live, like the idea of like we're just going to answer chat GPT, weird chat GPT questions the whole episode and just see what happens or whatever. Or we don't know what the topic is. It's a grab bag, spin the wheel type of topic and see what the AI comes up with. And we have to just, launch into it. But I actually think, to your point, both of your points, I think we need to kind of, I think it's going to be hard to vet the guests to get the perfect guest. I think what we need to do, Jeff, is to shift it towards the format so that it's a discussion. And yes, I think we also should not resist doing the three of us, because I think if we listen, we had this week's topic was the three of us are just going to talk about what we've learned. But if the three of us had been decided that we were going to talk about, is AI going to take over the world, we would have had just as much fun and interesting discussion as we just had, maybe more so.
Well, I would say I think the interesting thing there is it's sort of about flipping the script. I think that we have taken the approach of we invite a guest, or at least I being the person that comes up with the titles most of the time, and usually I just take the titles that people gave us from our intake form. Is we have taken the perspective of we invite a guest and then figure out what we're going to talk about based on the guest. And I think that we need to, that's the key. I think that we need to turn the other way, is we need to not focus on, what is this guest going to talk about, but we're going to talk about this topic. Let's bring a guest in. And I'm not like, this is not rocket science. I mean, the nightly news has been doing this for, since it was on the radio, right? You bring on a guest to talk about the topic that you want to talk about. And I think that could be a really interesting, twist for us to look at.
I think we should bring on a guest and have ChatGPT tell us what we're going to talk about. That could be just as one option. That could be really fun. We don't know what we're going to talk about. Nobody knows. We're going to just say to the LLM, what's an interesting topic? What should we talk about today? And then,
we'll try it out on ourselves first, and then find somebody with the nerves of steel.
All right. Maybe we need to change our name from Twinning Strategy to like Twinning Chaos or something. All right.
Like, listen, we could totally have, we could have your, our kids be on if we're doing just a random, we could have anybody on if it's just like, we don't know what the topic is. You just have to be ready to prepared to have a conversation about anything.
I think
if you don't know anything about it, oh, well, too bad. That's great.
I think Elena's kids would come on. I don't know about mine.
Yeah, they would.
My kids are very anti.
I think
podcasting.
Everything. AI, whatever.
Well, whatever. Whoever it is, it could be. We could invite
and make them talk on the podcast. Like you must.
We can invite Steven, the third Siegel brother, and see if he wants to go.
Maybe. All right, let's Eric, let's do our wrap up here. Let's do one thing.
Yeah. So what's the one thing that you want to leave, Jeff, that you want to leave our audience with?
I guess I want to leave the audience. This has been such an incredible experience of doing this for 100 episodes. I'm a different person, I think is the best way to say it, than I was when we started. And so I'm excited to see kind of where we go next with it and how we make it sort of feel new and fresh and different, but have definitely learned a ton. So that's my one thing, is I guess goes back to that point of just do it. Just give it a try.
Yeah, similar here. Don't be afraid. Yeah. Give it a try. Whatever it is you want to do.
And my thing is, I might be totally wrong about it, but keeping it goofy and fun and like a little bit silly and whatever, it's not just about being more entertaining. It's also being, or just not just entertaining for our guests, but it's also about making it fun for us, right? Like there's no reason to do this if it's not fun for us. And how do we keep it fun? And that's, I think, where we gotta, where the next 100 episodes need to move towards, okay, we learned something from this kind of approach that we took, and we've met all sorts of fun, interesting people, but how do we kind of ramp up and make it the next level of at least entertaining for ourselves? So that's my one thing. Thank you both for entertaining and actually doing this for 100 episodes with me. I realize that I am, held responsible in a positive way. I hope for like pushing us into doing this. I do also feel like I'm a different person. I'm not sure I understand where I was coming from at the time, but like, I'm glad we did it. It's been a blast, and let's looking forward to figuring out how we're gonna do episode 101 through 200. So thank you both.
Thank you. Happy 100th.
Happy 100th.